Donald Trump said that countries around the world are going to have to choose between the United States and China. The Trump administration has not been told that the world has actually made a huge decision over the course of the last 25 years. In blue, in 2000, where the U.S. was the largest trading partner for these countries around the world. Now you see the huge difference in 2024. The world is getting sick of the weaponization of the dollar. And it seems like the Trump administration's attempt to push ultimatums to try to bully the world is a big part of this.
I mean, this is the business model of the US, of big US corporations. You create a monopoly, and then everyone around the world has to pay you monopoly rents. I mean, it's like a landlord, right? This is what the economist Michael Hudson has been so brilliant at pointing out, is that a landlord doesn't produce anything. They own the land, and you have to pay them rent for the privilege to use it. And this is how many US big corporate monopolies operate, especially in Silicon Valley. This is their business model. In fact, Peter Thiel is the kind of power behind the throne of the Trump administration. He is this far-right billionaire oligarch from Silicon Valley. He wrote openly in an article that capitalism is more important than democracy. He does not believe in democracy, but he does deeply believe in capitalism. But when he says capitalism, he means monopoly. He wrote in an article in the Wall Street Journal titled "Competition is for Losers." That's the title. In that article, he said that capitalism is the opposite of competition, because he points out that if you have competition, eventually you have the rate of profit to fall. So essentially, he's acknowledging that Karl Marx was right, that when capitalists compete together, they push down profit margins. And if there's a perfectly competitive market, profit margins will eventually fall basically to zero. So Peter Thiel says that's bad because he's a capitalist. He's a billionaire. So he says we need monopolies. So he says that capitalism is not based on competition. It's based on monopolies. And he says monopolies are good. And he has a long article and he has a lecture you can find online explaining why monopolies are good and why Silicon Valley's business model is based on running at a loss and destroying all your competitors. And then when you have a monopoly, charge monopoly rents, and suddenly you make a ton of profit. And if you look at many big tech corporations in Silicon Valley, this is exactly how they operated. Uber is an example, right? Uber comes in, it's running at a loss for many years. It tries to destroy all of the unionized taxi unions. You know, taxi workers in many cities like New York, they had strong protections, benefits, healthcare, retirement, because they were in a union. Uber comes in, it in some cases operates on an illegal basis or a semi-illegal basis in some cities. It destroys the unions because it undermines them by offering much cheaper taxis. So obviously, you know, if you're an average person, you're living paycheck to paycheck, you're going to get an Uber. It's much cheaper. And then after they bankrupt the taxi unions and destroy their competitors and they establish monopoly, then Uber doubles their prices, which is what they did. And now they're very profitable. And this is true for many other social media companies. They operate services for free, they establish a monopoly, and then they start charging people money, or they fill everything with ads, or they limit your services and you can only use all of the full services if you pay them money. So this is what the US wants to do to the entire world. No competitors. Every country must be reliant on US big corporate monopolies. That's how you maximize your profits. And this is how you get billionaires, right? This is why when China just surprised the world with its extremely rapid development of electric vehicles, high quality, cheap electric vehicles, inexpensive, but very good. What was the response of Elon Musk? And this was even before he was in the government. This was back in the Biden administration. He said that if the US government doesn't impose significant protectionist policies and restrictions on Chinese EVs, we will go out of business. Tesla would go out of business. And after he made those remarks, a few months later, the Biden White House put 100% tariffs on Chinese EVs. So, I mean, the Silicon Valley business model relies on no competitors. China is the major competitor. Go to Europe. What social media platforms do they use? US social media platforms do use. They use US social media platforms. They use Amazon. They use Google. They use Microsoft. They use Apple. These are all US companies. India is another example. India banned the BJP government of Modi, which has flirted with the US, but also kind of maintained an online position and now is improving relations with China. They went through, in particular, a very heated moment of anti-China hysteria in India, and they banned many of the most popular Chinese apps, like TikTok, which the US is trying to do now, right? What happened after India banned these Chinese apps? They went back to only using US apps. They don't have Indian social media platforms and Indian alternatives to Amazon. Amazon is very active all in India, and Amazon is undercutting local Indian producers by copying Indian products and selling it with the Amazon label. So this is what it's all about. It's about these US corporate monopolies being able to control the entire world, extract monopoly rents from everyone, and living like, trillionaires. That's their goal. They already have hundreds of billions. The goal is to have trillions. And China is the only country that actually has alternatives to all of this, which is why the US government is trying to ban them. The US government, in Trump's first term, they put sanctions and restrictions on Huawei. And then under Biden, they threatened to ban TikTok. They briefly banned TikTok. Now Trump's threatening to ban TikTok unless it's sold to a US company. And now they're talking about banning DeepSeek. The US military already banned DeepSeek. And OpenAI, which is 49% owned by Microsoft, its billionaire CEO, Sam Altman, he's calling for the US government to ban DeepSeek as well, claiming that it's linked to the Communist Party of China. And finally, this brings me to trade. So you show this very important map that shows that the majority of countries on Earth now trade more with China than with the United States. China is their largest trading partner. And why is that? It's because China produces everything, and these are high quality goods at very low prices, because the Chinese government carried out a concerted industrial policy. Every 5 years, the Communist Party releases a 5-year plan saying, these are the targets of the economy where the government is going to prioritize growth in these sectors: semiconductors, drones, artificial intelligence, electric vehicles. They released plans. They released a new energy vehicle plan. That's the term they use for electric vehicles, saying we're going to develop an electric vehicle industry and become a world power in automobiles. And they did so. They met their goals. In 2015, they made an industrial policy for Made in China 2025, saying we're going to provide investment in infrastructure, education, job training, cheap loans from state-owned banks, and other government support to develop these industries in strategic areas so we're no longer dependent on the US. And they've done so. So China shows that, yes, they have a socialist system with a market economy. It's a socialist market economy, as they call it. So it's not the Soviet Union. It's a different model, but they have the best elements of socialism with also combining market elements. So you do have competition, pushing for technological innovation. Their system is simply much more efficient, much more competitive, and much better than the US system, which is based on monopolies, charging monopoly rents, based on privatization of all of the public utilities, so they're expensive as possible. Infrastructure is falling apart because the government doesn't invest. Education is insanely expensive. Only rich people can afford good education. I mean, the Chinese system is simply much better at actually meeting the needs of its people and producing things to make people's lives better. The Chinese system is not good at inflating bubbles in the stock market. And they're currently popping the real estate bubble because, as President Xi said, houses are for living in, not for speculation. Whereas in the US, 10% of houses are owned by private equity and other investment funds. So, I mean, the Chinese system is simply a better system, and the US cannot accept that. And instead of learning from the Chinese system and trying to engage in an industrial policy, the Biden administration kind of tried a milquetoast, half-baked attempt at industrial policy with the CHIPS Act and the Inflation Reduction Act, which now Trump is tearing up. And he expects that tariffs are going to magically reindustrialize everything. And that's all it takes, while cutting taxes on the rich, cutting taxes on corporations, reducing regulations. I mean, all they're doing is accelerating the deep structural crisis in the US. And, I'm an American, you're an American. I think that there's so much the US could learn from China instead of waging war on China. And if we were a little humble, we can say, well, yeah, we should actually do a lot of these industrial policy measures, public ownership of the banks, public ownership of all schools and education, and not just rich people can go to the good universities, public ownership of infrastructure to build high-speed rail, public ownership of the electrical grid and telecommunications. There's a lot that the US could do, but it's run by an oligarchy. It's not a democratic system. It's a plutocratic system in which the rich buy politicians through campaign contributions, which we now know the Supreme Court in Citizens United said there's no limit, that corporations are people and they can donate as much money as they want to buy off politicians to do what they want. So until those problems are solved and there's a deep structural transformation of the United States, unfortunately, US politicians are just going to look for scapegoats. And their scapegoats, in the case of the Republicans, can be immigrants, LGBT people, whatever, wokeism, DEI. Or in the case of both parties, their scapegoats can be foreign countries, especially China. And they want to blame China for everything. The billionaires in the US who caused all of these problems, they want to blame China. But in reality, of course, in the US, we should be looking inward and see that it's the oligarchs themselves who are responsible. And China has benefited from the many bad policies that the US government carried out, but that's not China's fault. Every country is going to do what's in its interest. But unfortunately, the oligarchy of the US don't care about the vast majority of people. They only care about their own well-being. We see that now very clearly with Elon Musk, the world's richest man, like trying to run the US government like his own personal fiefdom. So I think that's a much bigger problem than anything China's doing. And the more, that we can stress that message, I think the better it is.
For wherever the United States holds on to any kind of technological superiority, which still does exist in some areas, it is fast shedding its industrial capacity. What exactly is the United States afraid of? Because you mentioned Wall Street and the corporations. They're all a part of this. They all share this fear. They're moving in this way in order to prevent the multipolar world from rising.
At the end of the day, all these issues are related. Domestic politics in the US is obviously very closely linked to global politics, and the US government is acting in the interests of these oligarchs on Wall Street and in Silicon Valley. And this is true for all US governments. This is certainly true under Biden. Famously, Biden, when he campaigned for president, Biden said that when he was at a campaign rally or a fundraising event, a gala with a bunch of rich people, he said that if I'm elected, nothing will fundamentally change. That was the famous quote. And he told a bunch of rich donors that. And he was right. When Biden was elected, nothing fundamentally changed. But in the case of Trump, he's just made it as clear as day. You have to be blind to ignore the fact that Trump is constantly doing events at the White House with a bunch of billionaires, the richest people in the world. And Trump loves that. Again, at his inauguration, Trump invited the world's richest billionaires to sit with his cabinet members, including Jeff Bezos, Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Tim Cook, Sundar Pichai, who's the CEO of Google. And then he invited more billionaires like Sam Cook. Sam Cook. I combined Tim Cook and Sam Altman. Sam Altman to the White House for this AI announcement. And then actually just a few days ago, after Trump's tariffs briefly crashed the stock market, then it went back up, Trump, he went on his Twitter copy website and he tweeted out, like, now is a good time to invest, like buy stocks. And then the stock market rallied because the US government is now openly doing pump and dump schemes. We talk about the US economy has become like a big house of cards based on a bunch of finance bros selling NFT schemes to each other and pump and dumping, meme coins. The US president has a meme coin. His wife, Melania, has a meme coin. And then now Trump himself is like pump and dumping the stock market with his Twitter copy website. But then after he did that, he invited Charles Schwab, the billionaire financier, to the White House. And Trump said, yeah, he made $2 billion in one day. What? This is insane. This is just blatant looting, blatant corruption. I often say that, like, what the U.S. did to the former Soviet Union, to Russia in the 1990s, with the looting of the country by oligarchs, that's what the U.S. is doing to itself now in broad daylight. And I mean, it's incredible. But I could keep ranting, but I'll briefly now answer the question from your super chat. Great question. So if China doesn't make the most advanced chips, who does? Well, the answer is that mainland China doesn't make the most advanced chips, but a part of China does, which is Taiwan, which according to international law is recognized as a province of China. Even go to, for instance, the IMF website, which is dominated by the US. They have to acknowledge that it says Taiwan province of China. At the United Nations, they say Taiwan province of China. Well, Taiwan has the world's most advanced semiconductor manufacturer, which is called TSMC, Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company. And Trump is actually trying to force TSMC to move over to the US. It's actually bipartisan, again, like many of US imperial policies. The Biden administration passed the CHIPS Act, which was an attempt, again, a half-baked attempt at having an industrial policy in which the US government would provide incentives to develop local manufacturing of advanced chips in the US, largely because they're preparing for a war on the Chinese mainland. And the US knows that they're going to try to use Taiwan as this base to carry out a war against the Chinese mainland. So they're probably going to end up destroying Taiwan, the US. And they, just like the US destroyed Ukraine, and in an attempt to try to weaken Russia, as Biden's Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin said, the goal was to weaken Russia. They destroyed Ukraine and they didn't weaken Russia, but now they're going to try to destroy Taiwan to weaken the Chinese mainland. And so Trump has been forcing TSMC to continue to move its assets to the US. And what's funny is, the US government has been providing these incentives to TSMC, and they've made some factories in Arizona, but they've found a huge problem. It took them years to build all these factories and everything. And there were no skilled workers in the US who knew how to make semiconductors, because you can't just go from the street one day and you see a job listing and you go there and then you make semiconductors. It's extremely complicated, very skilled work. It's going to take a long time to train US workers on how to do this. So what happens is that TSMC, half of their employees are from Taiwan. They're just sending these employees from the factories in Taiwan with their families, and they're sending them to Arizona. And they're all like, they hate living in Arizona. I mean, so it's a mess. But this is called a chip war. I mean, in the 21st century, this is one of the most important parts of the modern economy. Chips, semiconductors, computer chips, which are in everything. And China produces many of the legacy chips. The mainland of China produces the, not most high level, not the most advanced chips, but the most common chips. But then Taiwan province, it manufactures the most advanced chips. And then also ASML in the Netherlands is another major company involved in designing the machines used to make the chips. And then NVIDIA in the US is designing chips, but not actually manufacturing them. So once again, we see this global supply chain in many different parts of the world, and not even to mention all of the rare earths and the critical minerals and all of that are in the actual chips. And then all of the skilled workers. I mean, it's a very complex supply chain. It's going to be very difficult, if not impossible, for the US to recreate that supply chain, which is why, this attempt at decoupling from China, I think it's either going to fail or it's going to take many years, if not decades.
Yeah, and with lots and lots of pain. I think maybe I can pull up one of these images, Ben, because Chinese social media has been doing a lot of trolling. Okay, and we can just end maybe on a fun note, so to speak, because of course there's been the Xi Jinping being told by Donald Trump, you need to call me to settle the trade, to settle this, to settle the trade disputes. The ball's in your court. You need to call me. We don't need to make a deal with you. You need to make a deal with us, which has, and I'm just trying to pull up all the examples of this that I have pulled up, because, it's just so funny to watch Trump actually having blinked, the United States having blinked. And here is what Chinese social media was posting these I'm not going to play the music to them, but because of copyright, but these AI videos of essentially what the United States economy will become when the tariffs are supposed to supposedly reindustrialize the United States. So it's videos like this have been shared everywhere of just, the Trump administration making the sneakers now, making these so-called lower value added goods, returning them to the United States. And it's been hilarious. And then there's been so many on the front of just trolling. Here is one on the press secretary of the Trump administration wearing an outfit literally designed in China for a lot cheaper, actually. And China has been promoting their goods lately and how cheaper they are. I think there was one video saying that, there are these luxury bags you can get for 40,000 US dollars, for tens of thousands of US dollars. But if you actually just get it from the Chinese factory that's putting together all these parts and producing the bag, you're going to get them for 10, 20, 30 times cheaper. And
it's literally the same. The only difference is it doesn't say like Louis Vuitton or whatever. It doesn't have the little tag, but it's exactly the same.
It's exactly the same. And then I wanted to show the one of actually the military. Maybe I already have it pulled up. Yes, I do, actually. Here it is. So I think this is the Weibo account, actually. Yes, of the PLA saying, "Are you waiting for a long-awaited phone call?" Referencing Donald Trump continuously. I think he said this repeatedly over and over again, that Xi Jinping needs to call him, despite the fact that it's in the Trump administration laying all these tariffs on and essentially trying to bully China into taking just, this lying down. So all of this to say is that we are seeing, I think, Ben, and I think this kind of summarizes the stream. And I just want to thank everyone for giving all the super chats. I'll pull them up while I get Ben's final reaction. I think what we are seeing is that despite the growing pains, the difficulties that building a multipolar world, building an alternative to U.S. full spectrum dominance, despite the growing pains associated, we are actually seeing the United States through this trade war, but really through its entire foreign policy under Trump, before Trump. I think we've been seeing this for subsequent administrations over and over again. The more that it accelerates, as you said, this aggression on all fronts, whether it's military, economic warfare, what have you, it actually, what it does is, well, there may be a massive body count and just destruction laid in its wake, but what we see out of that comes a strengthening of relationships, of bonds, of new forms of cooperation, of de-dollarization, of moving toward a world that is truly post-United States. And China is the most advanced economically. We are seeing this more and more so with countries like Russia militarily. And, it's only going to accelerate the more that the United States takes this absolutely destructive posture. But we're in an age where it can't really, unless there's a fundamental change in U.S. politics, unless there's a fundamental change in U.S. politics, there is no, in U.S. economic development, its system, there is no other option that those who pull the strings of someone like Trump or someone like Biden or whoever, they don't see any other option. Because if the other option is to cooperate, is to treat another country like an equal, is to allow an alternative economic development system to emerge alongside it, well, then that cuts into what their ultimate goal is, which is to topple the Chinese government, the economy, take it over, do what it does, which is nothing ever good. Just look at what's happened to Ukraine. And there's so many other examples to that. But that's ultimately the goal for China, for Russia, for Iran, for the rest, is to topple them means to extend this dominance. And it's not working in the way that I think many who see U.S. superiority and exceptionalism and all of this, and who still hold on to it, I think are having a hard time with this fact. The world is moving a different direction. The United States is moving in its current direction, in the other direction. And what they're hoping is to destroy. And I think you're right, Ben. I've been saying this. It's not about the chess game or the Brzezinski chessboard. No, it's about actually just trying to lay waste to all of the chess pieces in the way. It's not about outsmarting them. It's not about being better or competition anymore. It's about destroy, destroy, destroy. And that is winning.